Hi, I'm Justin Thames, Director of Governmental Affairs for the Florida Institute of CPAs, and this is Impact Report, your legislative update on all things impacting the CPA profession in Tallahassee. And this is a special edition of Impact Report where we'll give you a full legislative recap of everything that happened in the 2019 session. And with me today is Jennifer Green, our external lobbyist and longtime advocate for the CPA profession. Jennifer, welcome. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So, we talk every week for Impact Report about the bills we're following and kind of what's going on in session as a snapshot. Today, I thought we'd kind of start from the beginning of session or work our way through and kind of talk about some of those same bills that we worked on and kind of how they progressed through the session.
Absolutely. It was a long one.
Yeah, for sure. And we had a whole new cabinet, which plays a major role in kind of the types of policies that we see, right?
Sure.
New governor, and I think for the first time we had two female members of the cabinet serving at one time. I think that's history for the state of Florida. But what are some things that you think probably stood out as new issues that we're going to see more of in the next couple of years?
Well, I think the whole discussion about hemp, about industrial hemp. I mean, obviously, people get a little confused about what that means, whether it's not, whether it's medical marijuana or it's actually an agricultural project. So that was a big discussion, and I think early on the governor taking on the legislature, sort of putting him to task, saying smokable medical marijuana is not a big deal, and why not repeal the ban and send it to me the first month of session, which is what they did. So kind of those issues out of the box right after an inauguration that you wouldn't normally see, particularly from a new Republican governor. So those were two big issues.
And I like what you talk about with the governor, and he created this deadline for the legislature. He gave them 17 days to act before he was going to take legal action to kind of reverse course from the previous governor. I thought that probably, at least for him and some of the others, probably set the tone for the session as far as kind of how that back and forth between the legislature and the governor's office was going to go. So I think you would have maybe agreed that kind of set the tone. And how about Nikki Fried really coming through on the hemp issue throughout session, right? So she kind of made some moves along the way.
Absolutely. So you have an ag commissioner who had a background in medical marijuana or marijuana issues, and it just made sense to do it. And I think she came at it from a very administrative standpoint, not so much from a policy standpoint, but simply to say, look, we need some agricultural growth in Florida, and so it's not that topic anymore that is so taboo.
Interesting to note from the CPA side is that the Board of Accountancy was one of the first boards of accountancy to take some type of guidance on that issue and basically say that if a CPA chooses to do work in that area of practice, that it wouldn't be considered a lack of good moral character that's under our laws, and that the only time the board would take action on them is if the federal government or law enforcement took action against the CPA. So I think we're starting to see some of that traction in Florida continue.
Well, and that's important when the legislature is asking for or requiring by law a CPA to do something, whether it's a financial statement or an audit or something, something similar. When it's required in the law and that company is looking for a CPA to prepare that, you want to ensure that that individual doesn't have their license on the line. So,
and that's really a lot of what we do, right? I mean, from as far as our governmental affairs team, one of the big things that we always talk about is expectation gap. What is it that the legislature wants our members to do? Speaking of the amount of kind of bandwidth for CPAs, we saw another banner year for the least number of bills filed.
Yes.
And so, at least within the last, 2 decades?
Yep. I think it was 3,500 or so filed. Well, that includes all the resolutions and whatnot. But it was just under 200. That went at 197 or so.
197.
Ended up passing, and I think we only have a couple of vetoes from the governor thus far. So it's going to be interesting to see from a policy standpoint what he does end up vetoing. And,
that's right. I think he's still got probably somewhere around 140 pieces of legislation still out there that he has to sign. So there's
and the budget. Hadn't even gotten the budget yet.
Speaking of the budget, that was kind of where I was going next. We have a $91.1 billion largest budget in the state's history, I think, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Talk to us a little bit about some of the things. I know we have, for the CPA profession, the Board of Accountancy, there are 2 things that the FICPA advocated for that we'll be watching whenever the budget goes to governor, make sure he doesn't veto those things. One is the Clay Ford Scholarship Program to help fifth-year minority students complete their education and become a CPA. and then also the funding for the Unlicensed Activity Fund, which helps to combat unlicensed activity in the state of Florida. And both of those come out of the license fees for CPAs, and it's specifically used for the CPA profession. And Jennifer, you've worked on that issue for a number of years and remember kind of the progression of that. I think in the last couple of years, probably 5 years ago, we increased the amount of funding through the advocacy efforts of the FICPA of the Scholarship Foundation fund from $100,000 to $200,000, which was a big deal at the time, right?
Huge, huge. And when the program passed, it was a minority scholarship program, and it actually passed in 1998. It took several years to get it passed. It took time to argue why it made sense, and candidly, the best argument we had was that it was from CPA license fees. I mean, you're taking a portion of what a CPA is paying to the state of Florida, either individually or through a firm, to regulate them, and you're saying, okay, a portion of our license fees should go to give back to students that eventually need some help to be able to finish their education. I think the same thing for unlicensed activity. That had gotten vetoed by our previous governor for the last few years, so that $200,000 is it's a big deal this year. And I think that the new DBPR secretary told us early on, remember Justin, before session, I want to put that back in place and actually really focus on unlicensed activity efforts.
Yeah, that's a great point. The new secretary of DBPR, Halsey Brashears, has been great to work with from the FICPA's position. He's really dug in on our issues that we care about for the CPA profession and been willing to kind of support us along the way and kind of work with us where he can from the department standpoint. So far a good relationship there, and has a lot to do with kind of the interaction that we do on the GA side to make sure we keep those lines of communication open. So it's good progress.
Absolutely, and having a member of the legislature that is appointed to be that agency head was extremely helpful because he knew our issues.
That's right. We had House Bill 977 by Representative Cindy Stevenson, who's a CPA out of the Jacksonville-St. Augustine area, and then Senator Joe Gruters, also a CPA from the Sarasota area. He sponsored the companion bill of Senate Bill 1252. So the bill does three things. One, it reduces the number of ANA hours that is required for renewal of your license from 20 to 8 hours. And then it also caps the number of hours that's required for inactive licensees to reactivate their license. And then finally, what it does is it brings in the SSA standards into the definition of public accountancy. So those three things are, each one is a major issue for the profession, but all three together really put together a really robust bill for the 2019 legislative session. And you never know how those issues go, and you always wonder if the legislature is going to think it's controversial or not. But at the end of the day, it went through 5 different committees, and not one no vote, not one necessarily question. We had one question in 5 different committees, but relatively went smoothly through the process. Timing got to be an issue a little bit, right?
Right.
But I think at the end of the day, it turned out to be a great product, and the governor just signed it this past Friday.
Yep, absolutely.
So it'll go into effect July 1, and from there, the Board of Accountancy will do some implementing rules that they have to do. But Jennifer, you've seen the history of kind of the progression of the CPA profession throughout the state with the legislature. Where do you think this, ranks as probably one of the years, in the years past that you've seen of the types of changes we've seen for the legislature?
Well, I think from the CPA profession standpoint, obviously in Chapter 473, there's always been subtle changes every few years. And a lot of it, it's to Deborah Curry's credit, Justin, and you working on trying to get Florida in sync with the UAA, with the rest of the country. And the important part being you also have, not just reciprocity, but you have, individuals that are coming into Florida working on, via their firm or individual. And I think that's something that Florida's taken pretty seriously, and we've committed to the legislature saying, look, we don't want to put Florida licensees at a disadvantage, but we also don't want to put Florida consumers at a disadvantage as well, or our licensees that are going to another state. So I think that's been incredibly important. This changing the hours of ANA, reducing the hours is huge. And I can tell you that for the years that, the 2 decades I've worked with the profession, that has been the ANA portion of what you all do has been the absolute sort of, it's like that linchpin. It's the only thing that separates you from somebody else who says they're an accountant. So I think there's been an argument to keep it where it is. However, the reality is if you have individuals that are practicing in an area that doesn't require A&A, still make sure that they have a little bit of knowledge on a biannual basis, but also ensure that they're taking CPE that's pertinent to what they're doing and what they're practicing in. So I think the mix is a little different, which is good. You don't have you're not going to fill it all with behavioral. You've got technical business that you need to add to it. So I think that shows a movement with the profession. Now I know there's some states that have gone to zero. I don't see that with the FICPA for a while. I mean, I could be proven wrong, but I think there's still a fair amount of licensees, particularly that are active in the FICPA, that say there's got to be something related to A&A.
You're absolutely right, and the proof is in the pudding when we go back and look at our survey that we sent out to all of our membership the last probably 4 years ago. Overwhelmingly, the bulk of our membership that responded to the survey said a reduction would be nice to provide some flexibility in the types of CPE courses that we took, especially if we could take more courses that are relevant to what a practitioner does in their day-to-day practice. But overwhelmingly, the response was that they didn't see any kind of appetite for doing away with the A&A requirement altogether. And that's an interesting discussion about kind of the landscape of the profession nationally. I think we strive in Florida to try to be on a level field with most of the states. We have to deal a lot with substantially equivalent. There's not true reciprocity. Most states have to deal with substantial equivalency. I know that there's going to be a big push for more CPE reciprocity across state lines, and we just saw the firm mobility bill pass 2 years ago.
Yep.
And Florida was one of the first states to institute that. So I think we will continue to see progress in that area. But to your point, I think there are some certain things that it'll be a little bit longer in Florida to see them come into play. Now I could be wrong, but we'll see in the next couple of years.
Nothing wrong with Florida being deliberative, and I think the working relationship between the FICPA, the Board of Accountancy, and the legislature is incredibly important. There's a lot of professions that are regulated at DBPR or other agencies that have adverse relationships, and it hasn't always been great and wonderful, and sometimes they're on the opposite side of the fence, but for the most part, the goal is to ensure that, again, licensees are protected and consumers are protected. And I think, Justin, you really should also talk a little bit about the bill. It sounds like it was very easy, that it moved through the process. It was all great. We nearly didn't have the bill move in the House because there was a concern. It came out of the Secretary's office about the bill being additional regulation. Yeah. And that was because of the deregathon that the governor held and had all the boards from DBPR get together and talk about what are those provisions that they could deregulate. And so the argument we had to make pretty vehemently in the middle of session was, yeah, this is deregulation. Going from 20 hours to 8 hours of A&A is definitely less. And then also the issue of the reactivation of licensees. We've had this amnesty period in statute a couple times where no matter when you put your license on inactive status, that you were able to reactivate your license with 120 hours at one point.
That's right.
And multiple times we've had this in statute. And so the board, your board and your committee, your Governmental Affairs Committee, looked at the issue and said, okay, what makes sense? Making this permanent instead of having an individual, if they haven't been licensed in 10 years and they have, or 5 years, and they have 80 hours every 2 years that's building up, telling someone to do 600, 800 hours of CPE doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Telling them to do the most recent hours, maybe with an additional, get them into the next, 40 hours into the next cycle, but to get them the most recent important continuing education as possible is important. So that was, another piece in it that was incredibly important. And I think being able to say again to our regulator, look, this makes sense and this is why the profession wants it. I will say they had their own bill, a deregulation bill that had some pieces in it that would have affected everyone at DBPR that didn't end up passing. So again, another reason why we're really appreciative to be able to have the FICPA work on legislation separate and apart from the agency that's really focused just on Chapter 473, which no one else really cares about except our members. And
you raise a good point, is that a lot of times some of the issues that the profession works on in the eyes of your day-to-day legislator, it can be kind of confusing about. You brought up the fact that the reduction in A&A hours wasn't really necessarily viewed as a reduction in the requirements for CPAs to take for CPE, and we had to explain kind of that most of our members who have to take those hours are going to be thrilled at the fact that they don't
Sure.
have to take all 20 hours of A&A. So it was just some additional education on our part. And again, you brought up the fact that the profession all works together on all three legs of the profession, working with the legislature, the regulatory board, and the society or the association. We all work together, which is, from what I can say from some of my colleagues across the country,
it's rare.
It's a rare thing, and it's a very good thing. So we work. That's something those type of relationships take a lot of work. So
Sure.
Kudos to your help with us on the team, and that's kind of an all hands on deck
Absolutely.
issue.
And our CPAs in the legislature. That's
Absolutely, we couldn't do it without them. And we're kind of getting spoiled with having more than just one or two.
Absolutely.
For decades, there may be one in the legislature, but now we've got 3 CPAs serving the legislature. And all 3 really went to bat for the profession this year. You've got the new addition to the CPA caucus, Representative Mike Caruso, and then Cindy Stevenson and Joe Gruters. They've all, one point or another this session, they really all dug in to really help us work through issues that we've encountered through the process.
And the good news is our colleagues turn to them. So again, when you have an issue where the legislature wants a CPA to do something, they throw the word audit around all the time.
Right.
And we say, that's not an audit. Or what do you want them to do?
What do you want the audit to tell you?
Exactly.
Right,
What
right,
is
right.
it exactly you're looking? A smoking ban was something that, years ago, it was like, do you want CPAs to count hot dogs? Or, what do you want to ensure? So I think that having them in the legislature is extremely important. I don't know how they do it, particularly those that are in public practice, how they end up doing it during session. So kudos to them.
They work a lot of late nights and work on the weekends. So, but we're very fortunate to have them in the process and be on the CPA team during the legislative session. I wanted to talk a little bit more about some of the other bills. I know we talked a little bit about dereg. I think that's going to come back. We're going to see more deregulation bills in the future. That's a national trend. We see that across the country where the legislatures will try to find one licensing element to dereg. I think we saw the most of it this year related to continuing education and also for cross-border licensing processes. I think that was a little bit of the bulk of what we saw in this year's deregulation bill. I would imagine we'll see most of that same bill next year, right?
Sure,
if you'd agree.
sure.
And potentially some other kind of nuances to that bill. I think we might see some things come up that we didn't see this year. Another bill that we saw that would have been very problematic for the profession that failed was there was the legislative bill that would have required the legislature to approve any new regulation or any expansion of regulation of a profession or occupation. Mm-hmm. And it set up this whole process that you would have to go to, in addition to getting a bill passed, to essentially prove up the need for whatever new law or expansion of regulation. That bill would have been a huge hurdle for any kind of adoption of a national law that we have tried to adopt that puts us on even par with other states, and which is a huge concern for us.
Sure, and I think that's important too, is that every change that the FICPAs helped shepherd through the process has been to try to keep us in sync with other states. So again, our licensees aren't at a disadvantage. And being able to explain that to the legislature, sometimes they don't want to hear that, well, this is what other states are doing. Sometimes they have to hear it, and you have to give them the numbers. And so, again, working with the other state societies has been extremely helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that'll just be something we have to kind of stay vigilant about in the coming sessions. Because I don't think that's going away.
No,
anyway.
I agree.
We saw some technology and some financial literacy bills that got through. Sort of.
Yeah.
Right? Financial literacy made it through by the hair of its teeth, right?
Yep.
So, but that's a good thing. Financial literacy passed. Everybody can be a big round of applause.
It's huge.
Financial literacy.
That's huge. It's an issue that FICPA's worked on for a while, so it was nice to see it finally not get bogged down in other issues.
And it was really nice to see that they named it after the late Senator Dorothy Hupel.
Absolutely.
In her memory. She worked so hard on that issue and was such an advocate for financial literacy. It was very great to see them honor her in that way.
Absolutely.
So we also saw some blockchain bills that popped out this year. Blockchain is coming to a neighborhood near you. Don't worry. The Florida is not going to be last when it comes to that this year. And again, you're going to hear us say his name quite a bit because Senator Gruters had 69 pieces of legislation that he sponsored this year, including a bill that put together a task force for blockchain. And Jennifer, we worked a little bit on this with the Department of Financial Services CFO Petronas and his staff. And so that was interesting that, it started out with a small group of task force that included some local government folks, and then it kind of changed a little bit. We had some changes that were made early on in session, but the whole time we had been, from the FICPA standpoint, we basically went to both the bill sponsors and said, hey, listen, like having a CPA on this task force really makes a lot of sense because CPAs are on the front lines of the innovation and technology piece of auditing and all the reporting that has to be done, especially implementing blockchain on certain engagements.
Yeah,
so
the valuation part of it.
That's right.
It makes sense. We said these are the individuals that are going to be presenting the financial statements. Why would you not want them there? And there was a bit of an industry food fight going on that didn't involve CPAs.
Right.
But it was Senator Joe Gruters, he put his foot down and said, this amendment's going on this bill and it's staying on this bill. So
he sure did. And that really, without his effort, that we wouldn't have been able to ensure that a CPA had a seat at the table.
Yeah.
So
definitely. Heavy hand there, but well needed.
Well, Jennifer, thanks for being here today, and thanks to your team for all the hard work this session. It was a great year for the profession, and we look forward to many more to come. For our members, you can follow along and see some of the key bills that we tracked this legislative session on our website. You can go to the link below in the body of this email, and you can see exactly what we tracked this session and kind of the status of how those bills shaked out. And as always, thank you so much for your support. We appreciate your membership, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.